Whoa! Hello everyone, Dr. Eaves here at Southwest Brain Performance Centers, and today we're talking about dizziness and vertigo, or false perception of movement when you're not moving. One of the most commonly sought after conditions that we treat are balance and dizziness issues here at Southwest Brain Performance Centers. Interestingly enough, we typically see them a lot after concussions. There's lots of different ways that you can get some sort of balance issue. Most common that we see here is probably after concussion. But what are the three most common types of vertigo? Vestibular migraine. And typically people with vestibular migraine have very specific complaints where they may get a headache and then they might see like flashes of lights or auras before they get dizzy or after they get dizzy. BPPV is the second most common, and that's where a crystal in the inner ear might dislodge, causing you to have crazy vertigo out of nowhere. Typically seen when people put their heads back or when they lay in bed at night to go to sleep. That is BPPV, so that's one of the most common that we see out there too. Vestibular neuritis or an ear infection is probably the third most common vestibular complaint out there. And that's just infection of the inner ear causing an imbalance of your inner ear system, and it causes you to have the false perception of motion when it's not there. So let's talk about concussion though, because that's what we normally see. Now, I did say it most commonly happens after concussion, but you can get the BPPV from hitting your head. So that is a common complaint that's out there, but also we see it after concussion as well. But typically with concussion, vertigo that we see is a lack of communication between structures. So what does that mean? That means the inner ear typically fires to what's called our brainstem. And in the brainstem, our brain is able to understand where we are in space. So if you have 100 impulses, what we call them, so nerve impulses on the right side, and you have 100 nerve impulses on the left side, if I all of a sudden take 50 of those away on the left side, I'm going to have a decreased amount of input from that side. When that happens, this side's overactive, so it goes like this, and then we get this false perception of movement because one side's firing more than the other. Interestingly, with concussion, it's not typically the inner ear, it's typically the conversion of that in the brainstem. So our brainstem gets damaged and we can't understand that signal very well. And when that happens, we get all kinds of weird dizziness complaints. But what the most common is not necessarily spinny vertigo, like I'm spinning or the world spinning. It's I don't feel right or I feel uneasy. I don't feel safe when I'm walking. Or people will always put their hand out to touch the wall when they walk, or they feel like that's a lean against something. They just feel disequilibrium is what we call it. Interestingly, with the central integration issue, what we typically see is an upregulation of vision. So what does that mean? We have three major systems in our body. One is the musculoskeletal system, so our skin, our joints, our bones, our muscles, they fire up to our brain to tell us where we are in space. That's one system. The second system is the inner ear system, what we were talking about, the balance organs that are in your inner ear, your vestibular system. That's the second way you know where you are in space. And the third is vision. So our eyes, being able to see where we are in space, that's the third type of input that we know where we are in space. So when we lose one of those three, typically the other two upregulate. And after a concussion, we know it happens a lot because a lot of people get really exaggerated motion sensitivity. So you move something across their vision and they just can't handle it, or they can't read, or they can't track objects very well. So it's not the traditional spinny vertigo, it's I get a lack of communication from our inner ear to our brainstem. So our brain says, I can't rely on that signal anymore. So if you can't rely on it, you have to rely on the other two more. And when we rely on the vision too much, people get that motion sensitivity, where you walk in the mall and all of a sudden you feel like you have anxiety or something like that. Your heart rate goes up. You feel like you're going to throw up for no reason. And it's all these busy environments. Maybe you're driving in traffic and the oncoming traffic is just too much for you, or a big truck drives by and that throws you off. So that's common symptoms we see with upregulation of vision. When you upregulate your vision as well, is we see your eyes, if they're not tracking right, a lot of times people will have headaches right behind their eyes, so right here. And there's multiple different types of eye movements, whether it be tracking, or jumping from one target to the other. And if you do that incorrectly, and we see that a lot with concussion, if you don't do that correctly, you have all these weird symptoms. And the major one is headaches that we see. That being said, the last thing is the neck component, so the cervical spine. When people have head injuries, you don't typically, your neck is connected to your head, so you typically have damage of that neck as well. And when that happens, the neck tends to lock down, and you tend to move as one unit like this. So we always try to separate people's movement to give their brain a better understanding of where their body is on their head. So it's not just as simple as saying, I have vertigo, I need to go to the doctor. It's what kind of vertigo? Is your neck involved? Are your eyes involved? Is it your body, one of your limbs and your body parts involved? Is it the central integration of all these things going on? For that, at Southwest Brain Performance Centers, we look at all of those things and we look at how they all work together and try to give you the most comprehensive examination and workup. And later this week, we're going to show you some of the maneuvers that we do, some of the testing that we do to look at vertigo at a more in-depth way. And that's it for today. Thank you for joining.